How could Van Johnson sleep with 8 kids? A night of actors. It was born in Van Johnson, when Charles Vanell Johnson died on August 25, 1916 in Newport, Rhode Island. Even so, having a humble and emotionally growing up far away, his mother left the family when he was a kid. Van had hopes of becoming famous in show business from a very young age. He then moved to New York City and he worked in the show business, taking on odd jobs and getting better at there as vaudeville and bars. In his natural charm and musical skills caught the attention of Broadway managers' attention, which two small but important jobs that paved the way for his move to Hollywood. Van Johnson made his big break in movies in the early 1940s when he signed with MGM, a company that would shape a lot of his work life. In his early movies, he often made him into a nice American boy next door, a picture that stuck with me deeply with people during the war. His fame grew during the Second World War, too, when many of Hollywood's the biggest male stars were over there. Johnson, who was in good health, not allowed to serve in the military because a car crash that almost killed him in 1943 that put a metal plate in his head, stayed in the United States, and quickly was a must-have for brave wartime movies. MGM made money off of his good character persona, which put him in movies hits like 1943's A Guy Named Joe, the 1944 film 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, and the from 1943, Human Comedy. These movies not only made his fame as a trustworthy main man, but also proved to be a calming presence for a country at war. As the years after World War II, as events happened, Van Johnson continued to show an impressive range of skills as an enroll. He could do more than just light comedies or tales about love. He also did a good job with more serious parts. During the Caine Mutiny in 1954, he played the lieutenant. Steve was psychologically torn. Merrick, who was acting and keeping his own strong men like Humphrey Bogart. His act in this movie is often talked about as one of his best and shows a dramatic weight that shocked reviewers as well as viewers. Johnson as well showed an amazing ability to shift between types of movies. From comedies to 1954 by Brigadoon, where he played lead roles with Gene Kelly, to mysteries, tales, and even TV shows, jobs in his later years. The music skills stood out in a big way. He was able to sing, dance, and play a lot of his instruments, which makes him a real performer in every way. Besides his own Van, Johnson was praised for his work in movies, for his well-kept public image and being approachable. He was often seen as the Bobby Sox's hero. Refers to the huge number of young girls who loved him when he was at his best. His neat look and friendly personality from the screen made him one of the safest and most bankable stars of his generation. He had a great time, being well known not just in the US but also around the world, becoming a traditional sign of hope after the war, honesty, and the joy of being young. The fan mail was as good as that from big stars like Lou Reed and Clark Gable at the time, showing the strong emotional he built relationships with his fans. As time went on, Van Johnson moved with grace onto the stage and parts on TV, continuing to charm fresh groups of fans. He showed up in plays on the stage like Leo, and she was a guest star on Music Man and well-known TV shows like Murder, She Wrote, The Love Boat, and They. He kept working in show business well into his elder years, decades, driven by a deep love for entertaining other people. Even with the changes in the business world and the decline of the studio setup that made his job possible throughout his career, Johnson was a respected person who is often remembered for his being kind, gentle, and giving him comfort over 1 million people during some of American history's most troubled times. Van Johnson, the well-groomed and friendly, the top man of the 1940s and 1950s Hollywood, got married to actress Eve Abbott, a former stage actor, on the 25th of January 1947, a wedding that took place just one day after she split up with actor Keenan Wynn and finalized for good. The moment of not only did they get married quickly, also made a lot of people look twice the connections that are very closely linked between all three people. Eve, a woman who is calm and sophisticated with her own experience in theater, been married before to Wynn, a charming and well-known person, artist, and the son of the famous Ed Wynn, is a comic. What was happening was complicated right from the start, because of how quickly it changed from one marriage to someone else, but also because of the getting unusually close to each other people who were interested. Not long after getting married, Van and Eve had their only real child together as a daughter, in 1948. Her name was Skylar Johnson. With this marriage, Van also took on a father figure for Eve's 2 kids from her first marriage, John Edmund Keenan Edwin, who would go on to write books, who writes and acts, and Tracy Keenan Wynn, who made a name for themselves by himself as a writer for movies. It was mixed. On the surface, family looked like Hollywood family life. Behind the scenes, though, it was a lot harder. After many years, in telling hypothetical comment, Eve Beck said that her marriage to Van had not been one of mutual love, less love, and more of a plan organized by strong forces inside the studio system in Hollywood, in line with 2 Metro-Goldwyn officials as mayor of MGM. especially during the direction of Louis B. Mayer, had planned the union as a way to stop spreading stories about Van Johnson's being gay or lesbian. In conservatives who care about how they look in Hollywood in the 1940s, being seen as gay could ruin an actor's the job. Eve told them they needed their big star is going to get married to stop the claims about how he feels about being sexual, and I was the only woman there, which was sad. He was going to get married. Her words made it clear, the tense mood of the moment where people often kept their identities given up for the sake of being marketable and how the public sees them. Three people in love, or a rectangle, if it's bigger, accurately described, was further made more difficult by the lasting emotional ties between all the important people. Hey Edwin, the grandfather of the Wynn family, once said with irritated love based on how complicated they're getting along. I can't tell them apart. Evie liked Hanon. Keenan really likes Evie. Van likes. Evie. Van is special to Evie. Van cares about Keenan. Van is important to Keenan. It was funny, but a moving comment hinted at something deeper, and story with more emotional depth below the surface. A story about feelings of love, duty, doubt, and perhaps even ignored or pushed down love between the three. Louis, head of studio, B. Mayer, who has always stood up for MGM's stars and what people thought of them were known to do everything possible to get rid of any controversy could happen. Mayer looked at the studio's list of skills, not as performers, but as investments that needed constant upkeep for their image. He claimed that they were too strict to taking care of celebrities' private lives who he thought was gay, including Johnson. This attitude of fear and control put even more pressure on people like Johnson to follow through with heteronormative rules no matter what their real, personal facts are. Johnson's carefully kept up appearance as the upbeat boy next door, Happy Van in the end, were very different from the more troubled truth going on behind the scenes. They were married to Eve until when Johnson's Hollywood success was at its height and while Mayer was in charge at MGM. But things slowly fell apart after Mayer's death in 1957. While on stage in the West End, when The Music Man was put on in London, where he played the famous part of If You Are Professor Harold Hill, Johnson is said to have started a love relationship she was seeing a young guy dancer in the show. Ned Wynn, Eve's son, would afterwards say that Johnson had he left his wife and kids to do this dancer. He left her for a boy or a man. He's the lead boy dancer. Really, Ned said. He said in an interview, giving an inside look at the mental turmoil and shifting forces that finally led to the end of the marriage. The couple officially split up in 1961, and after being apart for a few years and going through the formal process, their divorce was signed off on in 1968. Away from the stresses of fame, and Johnson was limited by his public image, was said to fight dark demons that go back to his childhood. In line with Eve, who he is when no one is around, didn't look much like the happy character full of sunshine he often shown on the screen. She talked about him as sad and irritable, a man having a hard childhood and being prone to withdrawal of emotions. When faced with arguing or being in a bad situation, it was said that Johnson would go back to his bedroom and shut himself off instead of join in. He doesn't like getting into fights. And the way his emotional weakness painted a picture of a very private and hurt person who has been shaped by a lifetime of stress in personal and work life and society. It was also hard for Johnson to get along with time with his father, which led to his mental distance and lack of connection. This tough father-son relationship left a mark on him that lasted well into growing up. Too bad, at the time of the death of Johnson in 2008, he was supposedly not talking to his daughter Skylar, which shows that the toll on his personal life, and often a sad life story. A life that wasn't by movie fame alone, but also by secrets, sacrifices, and a deep sense of feeling emotionally alone. In the closed-off and being sexual with a number of other men who act, sometimes in fast succession, even though the morals of the time, some stories say that Johnson's desire for men the friendship wasn't just strong, but the size is truly amazing. It was said to have slept with up to 8 people in just one night. This amazing thing, even though the claim is shocking, it's not without setting. Van Johnson became well known. There was a time when the studio structure was king. Time when MGM does under the direction of Louis B. Mayer was under the control of a tight grip on the people and the personal lives of its contract players. It was frowned upon to be gay, and the end of their careers, and stars who failed to meet norms that aren't based on gender, they could have been banned or even worse. To keep up looks, studios set up weddings and unions with lavender between stars who are gay or bisexual and people who are partners of the opposite sex. Other artists who needed the same cover. Johnson himself got married to Eve Abbott, who used to be married to another star for many years afterward. Keenan Wynn was known as Think was one of these planned marriages. Eve, in public after Johnson's death, said that they were forced to join together. MGM put on her, and Johnson was gay, supporting the long-held belief hearsay. People who often went underground in Hollywood during the 1940s and 1950s have told stories, some more whispered fiction than proven fact, of Beverly hosts fancy private parties, Hills mansions, and private lands in Laurel Canyon or on the studio lots after work. It was at these events, away from the press and cameras, that a lot of Hollywood's hidden stars found limited freedom to say what they, our real selves. Johnson, by a number of these accounts, was a common visitor and a very sought-after person. Linked to rumors dating or having sex with him, several well-known and less well-known men, stars of the time, such as Rhodey, Richard Simmons, and not The Exorcise, but a 1940s star who played the same role, named Howard Farley Granger, and even Keel. How strong these ties were, long-term hookups or short-lived dates, is tough to say. But different biographers and scholars have written about these kinds of stories and retrospectives about queer past in Hollywood. The one special story that was told by people who knew how Hollywood's biggest stars worked beneath said that Johnson once told a close friend that they were proud of putting together a long night with of loves, one after the other. They were male artists who worked for MGM, under the Warner Brothers or Fox covers. The number given was 8, which is a shocking and controversial story that has been going around in the old Hollywood talk scene for decades. Names were whispered to connect that night, such as Clifton Webb, Anthony Perkins, and even a young Rock Hudson. Even though Hudson was incredibly private and hid for a long time of his early work. No matter what the number is true, not true, or totally false myths, what really matters is what the story thinks about a secret group of gay people, men in Hollywood who are bisexual and who gotten through an unfair system with there is often despair, secrecy, and code. Johnson, who looked like a boy, and a picture that seems conservative, embodied the two sides that many of these players had to keep up to stay alive in show business. The big difference between his public persona and private life turned into a so many stars are a sign of the double lives we're made to live. After the fact, Johnson's supposedly wild behavior, whether 8 players in one night or a few over a week, don't make them look bad, but to make people more human. They show a man who, like a lot of other people, wanted to meet. And being real, in a world that asked for silence and agreement. These stories that have been told quietly over the years are no longer just juicy rumors. They are a part of a fuller and more honest knowing what Hollywood's secret is past and what its famous people did to have fun with the world while keeping our real selves. Van Johnson slowly moved away from in the public eye and officially, in the early 1990s, she stopped playing. Coming after a long and successful career that had been going on for almost 50 years. As one of MGM's most well-known stars who could make money in the 1940s, and Johnson had changed his name to during his time on stage and TV in later years. But by the 1990s, and getting worse health caused him to pull out of acting completely. After he retired, Johnson moved into a less public life in New York City. He went to live in a penthouse apartment at 405 East 54th Street, NYC Street on the East Side, an important address that showed what he wants very important in Hollywood. The atypical cope from after World War II gave him a look at the East River, and a peaceful escape from the busy city below. For many years, Johnson kept a low image, not often seen by the public events. Even though he was known to still sometimes interact with neighbors and fans who knew him. He needed it. As he got older and with more care, Johnson finally left his place in Manhattan and moved to Tappan's Manor, an assisted living facility, a place to live located in the charming and beautiful town of Nyack, New York, along the New York River. This building offered getting the medical care and help he called for. In his later years, while also giving him a peaceful place to work, could spend the rest of his life with respect. Nyack, which is known for its art, it was a community and a calm environment. A good place for a man whose life had it used to be full of the fast pace of sets for movies, plays, and red carpet events, area rugs. This is where Van Johnson died, Tappan's Manor, on December 12, 2008, at the age of 92. His death put an end to an era for many old Hollywood movie fans' movies. Since Johnson had become the all-American, clean-cut man ideal during the best time for movies ever. Even though huge fame he used to have, his passing happened in peace, away from a lot of noise and flashing lights that he was followed. From what the public records and news stories, his body were burned in a way that fit his wants, or the wants of his closest living loved ones. Even though he didn't write any, his memory lived on through his children's love for his many movies, his many fans, and his daughter Skylar, whom he adopted. Even after he died, Van Johnson was still a symbol of a time long gone in American movies. Beautiful, well-groomed and forever remembered as the hot guy with red hair of the best times in Hollywood.